Welcome to RealGM Radio here at CLNS. I'm Wes Goldberg, and today we're talking about which teams are realistic contenders this season and break down why they will and why they won't win the NBA title this season. Let's jump in. Welcome to RealGM Radio here at CLNS. I'm Wes Goldberg. John Wilmes is here. He writes about the NBA for RealGM, and he's here to help me preview the NBA season by going through the realistic sort of inner circle championship contenders. We're going to talk about why they will win the championship and why they won't win the championship, sort of a pros and cons type of format. But before we do that, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube and on your podcast app. And a reminder, today's episode sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. So, John, thanks for jumping on with me this afternoon. Before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of this, I want to read you my group of contenders first, and then you just tell me where I'm right, where I'm wrong. If I left anybody out, you don't have to tell me where I'm right. Just tell me where I'm wrong. So the contenders I have, in no particular order, I've got the Celtics, the Thunder, the 76ers, the Knicks, the Bucks, the Wolves, the Nuggets, and the Mavs. Do any of them not belong on this list? Did I leave anybody out that should be on the list?
I have the exact same list.
All right.
This stuff historically is like not super hard to predict. I actually wrote an article about this for RealGM in like the season the Nuggets won, spring of 2023, and there was a lot of excitement about the Suns getting these new guys and the Lakers getting new talent midseason and the Warriors maybe getting it together, but none of them were on a 50-win pace.
Mm-hmm.
You have to win 50 games to win the championship. The only team who hasn't in a long time was the 95 Rockets. All of those teams were 50-win teams or close to it last year, with the exception of the Sixers because of a lot of missed games for Embiid. But I think that'll be it. Yeah, I have a few dark horses, but
I think we do.
Those are the real contenders.
I do think that in this age of more parity with the NBA, did we have the Thunder on our list of contenders last year? Maybe we did. I don't think we did. The Mavericks were coming off of kind of a weird year, and then they end up going to the NBA Finals. The Knicks, obviously, with their moves that they made, have kind of gotten onto this list. I don't think that they were on the list going into last season, but obviously with everything they did, they deserve to be on this list. Celtics, Sixers, Bucks, Wolves, Nuggets. I think all those teams were generally on most people's list. So let's just start. Let's start with the newcomer. Let's start with the Oklahoma City Thunder, which sounds weird that they're a newcomer because they were the 1 seed last year, but here they are. So I've got sort of my list of whys and why nots, and then I have a key question. We can wait on the key question here, but the reason why the Thunder will win the championship, okay, pretty self-explanatory here. They were second in net rating last season, would have been first in net rating the year before, except that the Boston Celtics were blowing the doors off of all the ratings. They were third in offensive rating last year, fourth in defensive rating, and with their offseason moves, both of those should probably just get better, although I do have some questions about their offense that we'll get to here in a second. But they subtract Josh Giddey, they add Alex Caruso, add Isaiah Hartenstein, who's now going to be out for 5 to 6 weeks, but you still have him for hopefully the playoff run here. And then, so you're going to get Hartenstein's passing, playmaking, the rebounding, obviously. And then Caruso, who can make open threes where Giddey was getting played off of, especially in the playoffs. You kind of get rid of all those weaknesses. Bottom 5 team in rebounding last year. Hartenstein should help them with that in a huge way. And then you've got SGA and John Williams or Jalen Williams and all these guys getting even better. So in terms of the whys, it just feels like they have a million reasons why.
Yeah, I don't think you really have to make the case for them. The only counter argument you tend to hear is experience based, but I thought their experience disadvantage last year was not severe, and that was their first run together in the playoffs, and I don't really think of that as a major barrier for them. Caruso, I think that they can afford to keep him on ice. Some of the, in my estimation, a little bit of irrational exuberance about his value as a player has not accounted for his. You can only kind of play limited minutes to play at his style, and is going to should miss a lot of games, although he didn't last year. But he's even said in interviews in Chicago in the past, he's like, I'm playing too many minutes on this team. This is not the way I'm supposed to play. I'm supposed to be like a 25-minute guy and go crazy every minute I'm out there. They can afford to use him that way. And a lot of people say Caruso in for Giddey. I really think it should be Case and Wallace playing for Giddey, and Caruso just kind of utilized as an X factor. Obviously, this Hartenstein thing is going to test their depth sooner than we thought it would. But I mean, they didn't have him last year, and they won almost 60 games, I think.
Right.
So I think they'll be fine. Yeah, and again, their top level defensively, in particular, is just like outrageous, just overwhelming. So they could win on defense alone. Offensively, they should be really good. I do think they need to get a clear number two guy, whether it's Jalen or Chet or anyone really. But they actually were a little more Shea dependent than I thought last year. When I looked at the number, they had a losing record, a very bad losing record in the 11 games he missed. They were like 2-9 or something. And they also had a losing record when he played, but didn't score 20 or more points, which was pretty rare, obviously. But they were pretty dependent on him offensively. And I think that they need to get a little less so this year.
It's a great call. So that's my biggest thing with the if there's a counter argument here, I think their offense was maybe a little bit over indexed last year and probably a little bit overrated. Where defensively, I think we did on the show a couple weeks back trying to predict the top 10 defenses in the league next year, and I had the Thunder at number 1. I just think they can roll out 2 or 3 different lineups where everybody's a strong defender, and so I do think there's just gonna be so much consistency there. Now, obviously, the Hartenstein thing throws a wrench in that, but again, not a long-term concern. Doesn't sound like. But offensively, my biggest thing with them is the 3-point shooting. They made 39% of their threes in the regular season last year. That dropped to 35.6% in the playoffs. And if you just look at the personnel, that 35% feels a lot more realistic than shooting 39%. They don't have a ton of great 3-point shooters, and their best one is Isaiah Joe. Isn't necessarily a guy who's going to be playing a ton of minutes for them, nor should he. And so, yeah, Chet can stretch the floor, but he stretches the floor for a center. He's not like a high volume 3-point shooter. Shea obviously has gotten better. Jalen Williams has gotten better, but we still need to see more of that from them. And beyond that, Caruso's not a high volume guy. I don't know. I feel like they're not going to be a 39% 3-point shooting team. They'll probably be closer to what they were in the playoffs, which again would have ranked 21st in the regular season at that percentage. They'll probably fall somewhere at league average, but even that is a pretty dramatic drop off from where they were last year. And so I think that offensive rating could fall quite a bit. I mean, their offensive rating in the playoffs was 110.9, which would have been 24th in the league during the regular season. Again, probably not that bad, but probably not where they were for the regular season. And so, all right, if you bake in a drop off offensively, then how awesome do they have to be defensively to make up for that? And maybe it doesn't really matter. Maybe that's just a regular season question in terms of their ceiling. Hey, you still got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, one of the best 5 players in the league. He can carry your offense the way Luka carried the Mavericks to the finals, and that's probably the answer. But that's my little concern is let's pump the brakes on how good they are offensively for a second.
Yeah, I think I'm remembering when the Bucks won in 2021. A big challenge for them throughout that regular season was varying their actions, so they would have, more to go to during the playoffs, and it was a lot about getting Giannis to play off the ball and work as a role man, which ended up being really pivotal for them in the playoffs. And it probably, I can't remember exactly, but it probably did hurt their offensive rating and maybe even made them lose games trying to incorporate those actions in the regular season. But it was some sloppiness that was worth it in the long run. And that's kind of what I would like to see from the Thunder this season. Don't be gunning for the highest rating all the time. Try to incorporate more stuff, maybe with Hartenstein, at the high post or something, varying the offense, getting some more intricate actions going.
Yeah, that's the main thing I know the rebounding and everything, but that's what I was so excited about with Hartenstein was the guy is a real playmaker passer from that triple threat spot. And when you put him there, now you unlock those overhead passes. I mean, we saw him hitting Caruso and some other guys on cuts, even in the preseason before he got hurt against the Nuggets. Adding that other layer would have made them a little less SGA centric, a little less of just, hey, throw him the ball and let him figure it out. And now I don't really know. Is SJ is a good passer. He's not an amazing one. I think everybody else on that team is kind of they're going to miss Giddey in that way, where you just had a guy who could get guys the ball. And now I look and I'm like, yeah, Caruso's that's not his game. So I think it's going to be incumbent on SGA and then Jalen Williams to really level up. And that's really my key question for the Thunder is who's the second guy and who can really emerge? And I think everybody expects that to be Jalen Williams. He averaged 19 points per game on 54% shooting. Those numbers dropped slightly in the playoffs, but again, not And they don't need to be. I mean, it was a great year for him for where he is in his career, but he needs to be better than that. He needs to probably be 22, 23 points per game and a lot more assists. Be real like a playmaking hub that's outside of SGA when opponents are able to lock that down. Or maybe it's Chet. Maybe Chet's the guy with his height who can kind of see over the defense and be that other playmaking hub and option, and then obviously the scoring that they need from him. So whether it's Chet or Jalen, it feels like one of those guys have to take a pretty substantial leap where SGA is already there.
Yeah, I think that it's funny. I don't know if you want to use this as a an opportunity to transition to a different team, but in the Western Conference arms race, I think that whether Shea or Edwards develops more as a playmaker this year is a huge pivot
Mm-hmm.
point.
Well, let's do it. Let's talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves. You're doing a great job doing all the transition here.
Yeah.
Why the Timberwolves are going to win the championship? I have written down. Well, they were third in net rating last year, first in defensive rating by a mile. They were 17th in offensive rating, but then just added Dante DiVincenzo, Rob Dillingham, who I don't know what to expect from him as a rookie, and then obviously Julius Randle there. And you've got Anthony Edwards on the rise. Everybody, all these rankings are coming out now. Everybody's got him as a top 10 guy. That to me feels like a projection. I think Anthony Edwards is awesome. Everybody wants him to be a top 10 guy. And by the way, that's probably not a wrong projection. He's probably going to get up there this year in terms of being that kind of player. We saw flashes of it and long stretches of it last season. So they're awesome. It feels like they're built to just win regular season games, which obviously helps their seeding in the West, which helps them in the playoffs. We saw that last year. Yep, the Timberwolves, they deserve to be in this inner circle.
Absolutely. I mean, Ant was the best player in the world, I thought, from the time of Cat's late season or midseason injury up until the Western Conference Finals, pretty much, or sometime during the series against the Nuggets. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
Jokic reminded us who's the best player in the world, but it was an astonishingly long stretch where he was pretty much the best player in the world, I thought. But there's still all those signs that like when they played the Celtics last year, it was I think the most obvious. Edwards can be trapped
Yep.
and he doesn't make decisions quickly enough. And teams are just going to do that to them in the playoffs. And without Cat spacing, that's going to be a bigger problem. So he really does need to take a step forward as a playmaker this season. And like you said, it's hard. We could debate all day. How large is the gap between, where he's at and where people want him to be at. Right. I think the Olympics showed us that there is an especially large desire for, an American MVP and an American championship level superstar at this point. So people are going to be pushing that campaign. But he really does need to develop as a playmaker, and with the loss of Cat spacing, that's going to be more important than ever this season.
And I do like the idea of adding Julius Randle to that group because you're at like when Anthony Edwards got trapped or when he wasn't able to make plays, it just felt like the entire Timberwolves offense just shut off. It just went into a complete stall where I don't know that Julius Randle is a better player than Karl Anthony Towns. They're certainly different players. And the one thing I do like about Randle is, yeah, you're sacrificing some spacing, but the guy can make stuff happen off the dribble. He can create his own shot, and I think that's going to be really important for them. And the Timberwolves basically acknowledged the need for more shot creation when they moved up in the draft to get Dillingham. The fact that you added another guy who can help do that, plus DiVincenzo who can obviously do that a little bit, I think can help their offense quite a bit. My question is this: Is Karl Anthony Towns ended up being really important to them defensively? They were the number one defense in the league by a mile last year, so much so that they were third in overall offensive rating despite being 17th, or overall net rating despite being 17th in offensive rating. Usually don't see that. A team that like below average offensive rating being one of the top two, three, four teams in net rating. But again, it was carried by their defense. But I was kind of just doing the math and at risk of losing the listeners with numbers here. If the defensive rating went from first to second last year, their net rating would have went from third to seventh. They would have been like between the Pelicans and the Clippers, and that just doesn't feel like an elite team anymore. So they can't really afford a drop off defensively unless they feel like leaps from Anthony Edwards, the addition of a few more guys, DiVincenzo, Dillingham, Randall, can boost that offense to something that's closer to maybe like 12th, 11th in the league, and maybe that's what happens here.
I think it's really interesting that it's possible. What I see on a more spiritual level is that maybe their special sauce last year was just playing three centers, which
Mm-hmm.
people don't really do. And obviously it was pretty much why they beat the Nuggets, right? But now their special sauce is more like just like hoopers, just like
Right.
crazy confident dudes. They drafted two, Dillingham and Terrence Shannon, and they brought in Dante too, who's like that. Julius is kind of like that. He's also very temperamental, which who would blame him in Madison Square Garden dealing with some of the stuff you deal with there. But yeah, it's kind of a personality makeover, right?
It's
So just
Anthony Edwards' personality now, right? It used to
yeah,
be something different, and now it's fully ant mode. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm really curious to see how it works out. I mean, I think the talent is obviously there. There's just so much pop with Dillingham and Shannon and Dante offensively. I don't know that it's all going to fit super well, but we'll just got to see.
Yep. And if it doesn't, Randall's a pretty easy contract to move, and they have other stuff. Like, there's a lot of teams that would like to have Rob Dillingham. I don't think they drafted him thinking that they would trade him, but if the right player comes down, like a package of Randall and Dillingham, that could probably fetch you quite a bit out there when we get into closer to the trade deadline. So they've got some optionality there. Let's move on to the Boston Celtics now. We got to get hit in the Eastern Conference team. I, they won the championship, reigning champs,
Yeah.
first in all the ratings, blowing up all the records, all these things. They bring everybody back, at least for this next year. The only real concern with them is Kristaps Porzingis, who is going to be out for a couple of months. We don't really know when he's going to come back. December, January, you kind of hear different things, but they had a winning record without Porzingis last year. Al Horford's still there. They have Xavier Tillman. There's enough there where they're gonna to say tread water almost feels like an insult. Like they're gonna still probably be they have a good chance to end up with the number one seed in the East again because they're just that talented. The infrastructure is there. Joe Mazzulla coaches them well. They're well prepared every single night. So when I'm trying to search the reasons why are self-explanatory. When I'm trying to search for reasons why they won't win the title, it's hard to find other than maybe the wrong injury at the wrong time against an Eastern Conference that's a little bit better.
Just fatigue too. It's just super hard to repeat. Nobody's done it in a
Yep.
long time. Obviously, they had three guys on the Olympics team too, so that adds the fatigue after having a long playoff run. And they've had a long playoff run every year for a long time, so you could definitely see it building up. But I mean, they're still. I don't know if I would call them heavy favorites necessarily, but you have to like debate between whether it's them or the field, basically, for the championship this year because they are very impressive, you know, championship defender, basically. So yeah, it'll be interesting. It's so funny in retrospect, looking over this whole Celtics era. I feel like, Marcus Smart was the guy they needed to get rid of, which I never thought was the case when he was on the team. It always kind of seemed like Jason and Jalen needed to decide what was going on between them, but it really seems more like, you know, to go back to the personality makeover thing,
Yep.
replacing Smart with Drew Holiday and replacing Udoka with Missoula made this like a very zen team, a very selfless team that stopped playing hero ball in the crunch time and just would go with a more clinical, breakdown of the defense.
Mm-hmm.
And Tatum really leaned into that in the playoffs. He didn't care about his numbers so much. He knew that he needed to be the at times very sloppy and inefficient fulcrum, driving into the lane, not really looking good a lot of the time, but it was exactly what the team needed. And, basically playing a center on defense
Yeah.
a lot and getting a ton of rebounds and just doing what they needed to do to win. And if they can maintain that like collective personality this year, they could definitely win again.
Yeah, it's sort of funny that you look at teams and you say, well, this team needs a lead ball handler and somebody to facilitate and all these things. But when Marcus Smart was there, he would pass the ball to Tatum, and Tatum would be like, okay, it's my turn. I'm going to take the shot now. And then when he would pass the ball to Jalen Brown would be like, okay, it's my turn. I'm going to shoot the ball now. I'm going to do my Jalen Brown things and just be a hammer and ram myself into the paint. And then when you took that element out of it, it put the onus on them to get each other involved, and it actually made them better. And it is sort of funny. I remember even back then, I was more pro the Marcus Smart trade than I think most people were because everybody's like, oh, well, they traded the heart and soul of the team. Like, how could you do that? And I was like, well, isn't the question we had about the Celtics the whole time the
Right.
heart and soul of the
Yeah.
team? Like they're mentally weak, they don't rise to the occasion. So if that's the heart and soul of the team, then get them out of there. I like it sounds kind of cold, but those two things never really added up for me, and it did put the onus on Tatum, and he grew in exactly the ways that you're talking about, where he became, yeah, like he became the point guard of that team, and it allowed Derek White and Drew Holiday to just rain threes and stifle opposing offenses and do their thing. So yeah, hard to find a reason why the Celtics won't repeat. But like you already mentioned, it's very difficult. Nobody's done it since the Warriors in 2018, and there's a reason for that. The NBA wants it this way, but every league needs a villain, and it feels like the Boston Celtics would be a really good one if they can manage to hit the repeat here. And it's only a matter of time when we see it again, not if we see it again. But one of their biggest competitors in the Eastern Conference, the 76ers, who made a ton of moves, adding Paul George. They also added a bunch of role players, Caleb Martin, Eric Gordon. They brought back Kyle Lowry, brought back Andre Drummond, and all those things. But the reason why they can win the championship with Joel Embiid last year, they were 31-8 when he wasn't injured and he was playing. That's a 65 win pace. That could be good enough to win or earn the number one seed in the Eastern Conference. They had a plus 10.3 net rating when he was on the court. That was even better. That was plus 12.4 with Embiid and Maxey. And you can only imagine that adding Paul George, more depth and all those things is only going to boost all of these ratings and stuff like that. I think they're very good defensively when Embiid is on the court. I think chemistry could be a question, but it just feels like the pecking order is so established in Philadelphia. It's Embiid when he's on the court, get him the ball. Tyrese Maxey is the point guard, sort of running off of all the Joel Embiid screens and stuff, and then Paul George is just chilling above the break, waiting for a 3-pointer and to attack like a rotating defense. I have less concerns about the chemistry in Philadelphia. The biggest concern, so there's all the reasons why, plus Nick Nurse, championship caliber coach, obviously winning it in 2019 with the Raptors. My biggest concern, and it's not a secret here, if Embiid can't be healthy, they have no chance. If Embiid is healthy in the playoffs and playing like Joel Embiid in the playoffs, then they obviously have a strong chance.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I just think this franchise is haunted, and if you want to tell me it's not, the burden of proof is on you. Like,
Right.
like this, we've seen the same thing every year. They still never even made it with Embiid to the conference finals in a weak conference
hmm
for a long time. So objectively, on paper, I see it, but I mean, it's just I'm not gonna buy another bridge.
You,
So
I,
that's where I'm at.
I do this every year, and so I think like to me the 76ers are East Coast Clippers, and for whatever reason I had the easiest time just writing off the Clippers. Like I won't believe that the Clippers could win a
But the
title
Clippers actually
until they're
made the
lifting the
conference finals.
and they right. No, I know I'm wrong here, right? Like and
Yeah.
I'm like there's no way I'll ever trust that team. They've burnt me one too many times. I'm not doing it again. I'm not doing it. Like I won't believe they've won the championship trophy until they're lifting the Larry O'Brien trophy. Like until then I won't believe it. And with the 76ers, every year I somehow talk myself into them. And I don't know why I have this bias, but I can't escape it. And I'm just like, yeah, on paper, how can you beat this team? Joel
Yeah.
Embiid was just like his scoring numbers are so dominant. And when it looks good, it looks so good. It looks like they can be so unbeatable. And I do think if you're going to beat the Celtics, it looks similar to how the 76ers would do it. And then there's one other team in the East, and I think they have a very similar kind of way to do it. But I don't feel like you're going to out Celtics the Celtics. Like if you're going to beat the
Oh,
Celtics, I think you're going to bludgeon them over the head and you're going to knock them out and you're going to keep going. And with Embiid and how dominant he can be, he could be that guy that bludgeons them over the head and just keeps it moving past them. So, but we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it in the playoffs from
yeah.
Joel Embiid, and now it's getting to the point where we could say bad luck and all these things. Maybe they're haunted. Whatever excuse it is, if it ain't happening, it ain't happening. And at some point, it's got to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. I think speaking earlier about the people really want it with Ant, right?
hmm
With Embiid, people want it so badly that they were willing to like imagine that him having some nice sequences in the Olympics was like proof that he became like a big game player finally. And it's like, well, no, he needs to be, kind of not have a bunch of superstars to stand on the shoulders of. He needs to really kind of take over games in the playoffs, and we just haven't seen that enough. And sometimes he's injured. Sometimes there's other excuses. And there's all sorts of little things that make me want to, buy another bridge with this team. I like just from like a personality standpoint that Kyle Lowry is back on the team. He's
hmm
got that connection with Nick Nurse, that championship connection. They're like world-class bastards together, right? There's all
Right.
sorts of tricky little things and bastardly little things that they do that I kind of love to see in a championship contender. And, Andre Drummond having 48 minutes of elite rebounding is like a really nice way to play basketball. But I'm just not going to fall for it.
Yep. All the reasons on paper, you're getting me excited already. You're like, yeah, all this stuff sounds great, but the punctuation, everything has to be. Until I see it, I won't trust it. Certainly won't be betting on it or anything like that. But the other team I was sort of referencing there was the Milwaukee Bucks, and I like the conceit of everything that they did. I like the idea of what it is that they've built. I know that it's fundamentally more unstable than the Drew Holiday build, but then after you made that trade for Damian Lillard, you obviously hit a higher offensive ceiling. And to me, it always just comes down to Giannis. And when you talk about somebody who can just break that Boston defense, like, yeah, cool. Like, you got a bunch of versatile, switchable defenders and all these things, but like, here's Giannis. Like, switch that, it's a lot harder. And he's capable, obviously, of breaking any kind of defense. And when you add the element of Damian Lillard into it with that pick and roll and the spacing and all that kind of stuff that it could bring, okay, like now try to find a way to defend that. And my thing always was, okay, it feels like you've got like the unstoppable force versus the unpenetrable, shield against the Celtics, and sometimes the unstoppable force just wins that battle. And that was the bet that I think the Celtics were making last year, and it clearly did not work. But that was for a ton of different reasons. More stability now with Doc Rivers. Say what you will about Doc Rivers, but that guy wins 50 games every year. Giannis does the same thing. They're going to be a top 4 seed in the East. It just feels like that's going to happen, barring any major injuries. And everything we've heard and seen from Dame, I like what I've seen in the preseason from them. It feels like more of that 2 game is starting to work here. You're seeing a lot more of the 5 out offense. Giannis playing out of the post, getting it to guys. Like it makes sense. Like Doc Rivers can put a system in place and get guys to buy in. And I think that's what they were really missing last year. So there's pieces that I like. They add Torian Prince, Gary Trent Jr., DeLon Wright. Like those are good bench pieces. The big question for them is Chris Middleton going to play? Because if he's got 2 glass ankles that he's trying to play on, and if he's not there for the playoffs, it feels like the ceiling for this team is pretty set where it is, and I don't know that that's a championship team.
Yeah, I mean, without Chris Middleton, but with a healthy Giannis in 22, um, they went to 7 games against the Celtics in the second round.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that and that's without Damian Lillard.
Yep.
You could debate all day the whole Damian Lillard Drew Holiday thing, but 49 wins last year, season from hell, and you get 49 wins. I mean, that's just a very high floor.
Yep.
I feel a little bit crazy when I hear people talk about this team. Like, is there something going on that hasn't been reported yet? Because I just see an obvious contender. I think there's a bit of overcorrection just because of how high everybody was on them going into last season and how much of a mess the season ended up being. And it was a mess before it started. It was training camp where the Adrian Griffin, Terry Stotts thing went down, and everybody was like, "What?" And they just haven't recovered people's confidence since then. I actually thought last year, in very small samples, they were the best team I saw. It was very sporadic, but like they beat the hell out of the Celtics twice. They beat the hell out of the Thunder. They beat the hell out of the Nuggets. I was at 2 of those games, and I was just like, well, this is the most impressive team I've seen this season by far. They were just super inconsistent putting it together. Classic veteran, been there team stuff. But you got to be consistent. You can't. The main thing we can't predict in terms of like compiling our pool of contenders right now is just like who's going to have a good program this season. Who's going to be on a nice flow and just not be chaotic, basically, right?
Right.
That's a huge part of it. So. They kind of have to prove that's going on before they regain people's confidence, I think. And then I don't even think they need luck with health when it comes to the playoffs. They just need Giannis to be healthy, which he is a very healthy player throughout his career. He just happens to have been hurt for the last 2 playoff runs, which also I think is denting people's confidence in them. But if Giannis is healthy, they're an obvious second round appearance. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
And as long as that happens, they're a contender.
Giannis played 73 games last year, 63 the year before that, 67, 61, 63. There's some COVID years in there. And you already mentioned it, but he misses the last 2 playoff series that they've been in. So they first and foremost need him healthy. You mentioned like sort of the chaotic sort of spirit around the team last year, and 3 coaches in whatever it was, 5 months or something. It was crazy. After firing Budenholzer, then firing Griffin, and then hiring Doc. But that was like order was sort of the name of the game in Milwaukee under Mike Budenholzer, and it feels like with somebody like Giannis, who's so elite and just creates so many good looks for teammates, and obviously defensively awesome with him and Brook Lopez in that front line. Uh, it just always felt like the floor was really high for that team. And I don't know. I think last year was just like the year from hell from them. Like everything that could get weird went weird. And I think they'll retreat back to what it was closer to under Budenholzer, under Doc Rivers. Because Doc Rivers, again, very orderly, sort of systematic head coach in the regular season, knows how to get teams through the regular season and manage that. Um, in terms of their contending status, there's a ton of questions in the playoffs. If Middleton's not there, you have the Doc Rivers factor. He could get out coached in some of these series. Like all that stuff is there, but I don't know that Doc's ever coached a guy like Giannis, right?
Yeah, no, he's never had. I don't think that the guy who's just the number one most physically overwhelming guy in
Yeah.
a series. I don't think so anyway. And I don't think Embiid counts because he's never healthy in the playoffs. But 49 wins, even though they didn't really play well, is just a testament to
Yeah.
how good they are at winning. They just know how to win. So if you combine that with actually like playing well, they could definitely win a championship.
Giannis and Damian Lillard outscored opponents by 10.2 points every 100 possessions when they're on the court together. That is an elite duo. And that's my main question for them. Are Giannis and Dame just dominant enough to just push them over the top? And the answer very well could be yes. We just have to wait and see.
And that's a measurement without any real chemistry. They didn't really
Right.
have any chemistry last year. It was just the raw combination of their gravities and their talents. If they actually have any kind of more developed chemistry this season, it could be just crazy.
Yep. Um, the Nuggets. This one's tough. This might be the toughest conversation we have because there's a lot of reasons why, and it feels like there's a lot of reasons why not. And this might be like when you break it down, the most sort of 50-50 split I think I have of any of these teams. Why? They have Nikola Jokic, best player in the world. Awesome. Their starting five over the last couple of years have been top of the league. They lose KCP, a major part of that starting five. But that starting five last year outscored opponents by 13.6 points every 100 possessions. The core four without KCP, according to Cleaning the Glass, outscored opponents by 14.5 points every 100 possessions. So it was actually better without KCP, although be it in a much smaller sample size. But I think when you look at a front office that values analytics as much as Denver's does, they know these numbers, and that's probably why they said, you know what, we're probably good not giving $20 million a year to Contavious Caldwell-Pope. Those are the reasons why. The reason why not, depth. You lose KCP, you promote, it looks like Christian Brown into the starting lineup. Yeah, I guess you signed Russell Westbrook, you signed Dario Saric, whatever. We could debate that, and we probably will. You start looking at that depth chart on paper, and you're like, oh man, like Julian Strawther's going to play 25 minutes a game. I mean, he looked good in a couple of these preseason games, like Peyton Watson, Zeke Naji. That's the thing that he still hasn't really turned the corner the way that Nuggets fans are hoping. Hunter Tyson, like you're looking at these names, and you're like, it feels like it should be easy enough to find two or three guys to just play 10 or 15 minutes off the bench for you. But when you look at Denver's depth chart, it's like, I don't know that those guys are on here, you know? And so that's sort of the biggest question mark hanging over this team.
Yeah, I think, Jokic is just 50 wins.
Yep.
That's not really a question. So they're going to clear that contender bar. Um, the Westbrook thing is so interesting. I think that he'll definitely help them in the regular season, but I hope that the front office is having a conversation where they're like, all right, how are we going to get this guy off the team in time for the playoffs? Because he's just a destructive player in the playoffs. And he, even in the regular season, he can be destructive in high leverage moments, but the volume of what he does is generally positive for your team. And he's a pacemaker, which is going to really help them, especially with guys like, Peyton Watson, Christian Brown. I don't really have a problem with walking away from KCP. I think that Christian Brown is a better defender than him right now. It's really more of an offense thing with this team. KCP wasn't doing anything incredible on offense. He's just a shooter, basically. Brown definitely took steps forward with shooting and dribbling and passing and guard stuff, right? He's like, he kind of like people think of him as a guard. He's really more of a wing. He's like a muscle boy. So that's going to be a big part of their ceiling, I think, is how much like a off-ball shooter, traditional guard can Brown play like this season. I think it's possible that, the Timberwolves playing three centers is the only reason we're not just talking about, the repeat
Nuggets
champion
repeat.
Nuggets.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that maybe we're overthinking it. If nobody else has three viable centers to throw at Jokic this playoffs, we could just see him, take over again. He almost beat Team USA with, freaking nobody on the
Yeah.
Serbian team in the Olympics. He's just that good.
I think he's still that good, and it's really easy to get distracted by a team that's not in the just by the fact that he wasn't in the finals and they weren't repeating last year. But I wrote for RealGM after they won 2023. I'm like, this is the first time we've had a consensus number one guy since LeBron was the consensus number. Ever since then, ever since LeBron kind of gave up that throne, whenever that was, and that's debatable, but it's always sort of changed hands. Giannis, Embiid, Jokic sometimes, but like by the end of 2023, I'm like, no, that's the guy. And I think most people still consider, yeah, that's the best player in the world. It doesn't matter. Whatever. Everybody else is just playing for second. Um, so I'm with you. I still think I remain pretty high on the Nuggets. There are Nuggets fans who feel like or not Nuggets fans necessarily, but people that cover the Nuggets, like Matt Moore, like last week came on the show and he was like, yeah, I don't know, like he kind of wants to go under. We did the whole over under spot,
Mhm.
and the over under I think is at 49 and a half. And I'm like, I'm going over because like you, I'm like Jokic is a walking 50 win player. Like that's just going to
Yeah.
happen even in the West. He's like, I don't know, like look at this depth. And I'm like, it does look shaky. Um, the biggest thing about losing KCP is just the volume of the 3 point shooting. This team has to find a way to generate more threes, and KCP was their highest volume 3 point shooter. Christian Brown is a little bit more mix and match in terms of his shot diet and the shot chart. Takes about half the rate of threes that KCP does, and this team was so already underwater and over indexed on mid range shots that it's flimsy for them in terms of how they generate offense. That said, in the playoffs, that stuff tends to matter less, and just like getting a bucket when you need one is more important. And Jokic can obviously do that. And then the other guy who we haven't even talked about yet is Jamal Murray. And
Mhm.
this to me is the biggest thing for them. It's my key question for them is can Jamal Murray be good at basketball again? Because he hasn't been since basically the second week of April. It was a rough playoffs, absent for like 2 game winners, but other than that, it wasn't an awesome playoffs for him. The Olympics were a mess, and people are wondering what's going on with him. He did get the extension. I think that's helpful in this case, where it's like, okay, it's been a bad few months, but the team still trusts me. His chemistry with Jokic is undeniable, but he just has to be a tough bucket getter, and I think he needs to have with the lack of depth that this team has over the last couple of years. Maybe one of his best seasons. He is coming off his best regular season of his career, and I think he needs to do that, but then and some in the playoffs.
I'm not as worried about him. I think it's easy to write off Olympic stuff because it's not the NBA. And
Mhm.
the dynamics of playing with Jokic are just so much different than playing with like SGA, which was not really a way that he'd probably played since college in terms of the on floor dynamics. Just with SGA as the lead ball handler guard, he just wasn't comfortable with it. Probably wasn't physically right. It doesn't really matter to me. I also think with the Wolves series, he obviously struggled at times. He still had some good games. Um, that's just an overwhelming team. They just have really excellent defenders. They had the guard slash wing equivalent of three centers to throw at him,
Right.
just as they did to Jokic, and that problem hasn't gone away for the Nuggets if they end up meeting the Wolves again in a series. Even if the Jokic breathing room has expanded in that particular matchup. So I'm not going to over index that series. I think he's still top five most clutch players alive. And obviously his chemistry with Jokic is just through the roof. Although Aaron Gordon's chemistry with Jokic now
Yeah, it's kind of getting there.
rivals Murray's.
Yeah.
But I always like point out that through many seasons of the last several years, in terms of the top 10 duos, like assists to score, um, Jokic and Murray is always in there, but Murray to Jokic is also in there like every year. And that's just an absolutely incredible thing to have. And nobody else has it. Nobody else is even close to having that on their team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I'm not super worried about Jamal Murray. I also just mentioned I just think this is going to be a very good defensive team. Playing more Brown, playing more Watson, you just have a lot of size and athleticism. I think defense and transition offense should be like really good for this team. I am a little worried about the half court offense, but like you said, when it's nut crunching time, Jokic is number one there.
Yep. Will be interesting to see what happens with Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric, who's sort of like big man version Russell Westbrook. It's been what 6 teams in 7 years for Westbrook and 4 teams in 5 years for Saric, or three teams in 4 years for Saric. It's just every team talks themselves into him. It's like it doesn't work for them, but maybe it can work for us.
Hmm.
And then they find out it doesn't work for them. So
Yeah, I still
uh,
think he's probably the best backup Jokic has had since Boogie Cousins.
probably,
They
yeah.
haven't had a backup for Jokic the last 2 seasons.
And you know, it looks good in the preseason so far, but I remember like the Warriors, it looked good for them early on too. And there's just
Right.
tends to be a Saric thing where he just sort of fizzles out, and I'm not really sure what's going on there, but we'll see. They could potentially make some moves by the deadline, although it would be difficult, but it's something that could be out there for them. Let's move on to the New York Knicks. Everybody wants to be talking about the Knicks. Obviously, the talent additions that they made, adding Karl Anthony Towns and Mikal Bridges to Jalen Brunson. Out is Dante DiVincenzo. You get OG Anunoby back. Look, I just think the top end talent of this team is obviously undeniable. Brunson was on MVP ballots last year. Karl Anthony Towns is like a perennial All NBA guy. Bridges and Anunoby are sort of like borderline All Star caliber guys. Josh Hart's awesome, and he's like sort of the perfect glue guy, fill in guy for all that stuff. Sort of Tom Thibodeau avatar on the court, kind of takes all that stuff that Tibbs wants to do and puts it on the floor. Um, I think they're going to be awesome on offense. I do have questions about their defense. It feels like we have already overrated their defense, thinking like this is one of like a Timberwolves Celtics type of defense. They were ninth in defensive rating last year, and even when they had OG and Obi on the floor, they were awesome. But I don't know how much OG is going to be on the floor, and I think there's some
Right.
serious health concerns with this team also. So I'm obviously high on the Knicks. Everybody's high on the Knicks. I think I'm a little bit lower on them than consensus, but there's no doubt that they deserve to be in this class of contenders.
They lost a lot of depth.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm definitely concerned about that. It was something I kept in mind, honestly, during my fantasy draft because Josh Hart was available for cheap, and I was like, he's going to play a ton of minutes on this game on this team. Like he's
Yeah.
no longer, a bonus player. Like he obviously turned into a major player on their team over the course of last year, and he's going to be continued to be in a major role. I think with if OG is relatively healthy, you have him and Bridges and Hart, you're going to have a good defense, even
Yes.
though Cat and Brunson are both certainly not elite on that end. I'm more so just concerned with like Cat in Manhattan, like Manhattan, right? Like this is going to be tough. Like this, a large percentage of that fan base already wants to murder him. Like that's just how it goes there. And he's one of those players who we look at that way. Like he's one of those guys who there's always been questions about how he handles the pressure. He talks in a fake voice during interviews and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a strange guy and a sensitive guy, and that's Julius Randle. I think is probably a lot tougher than Cat in general, and he had problems there. Like
Mhm.
there are, I think, really just New York and Philly are fan bases that are intense enough like this. Maybe the Lakers fan base, but it's a real concern. That being said, I think Brunson can take a lot of that off of him because he's just so unimpeachable and so great in the clutch. And I was actually like talking with some friends about this. Julius. Jalen Brunson is probably like a top 10 player, right? Um, and he's in New York, but he's not a household name, really.
Mm.
That's very strange to me.
Right.
We could see that change this season if he continues to play at the level he's been playing at. Um,
He's a
so
household name in New York, but
sure,
to your
yeah,
point,
yeah, yeah,
not
yeah,
nationally. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, not nationally now. So yeah, I just so many question marks
Yeah.
with so many new pieces. I just want to see it. Obviously, the talent is there. I think Tibbs, as like a defense first coach, is a slightly fallacious concept of him. Even in Chicago, they had his final season here, which I thought was kind of the best team they had. Actually, they were a better offensive team than a defensive team. With Pau Gasol and like Aaron Brooks coming off the bench and stuff, he consistently coaches guards to just explosive levels of productivity. Obviously, as has been happening with Brunson. Um, so yeah, I just what are the levels going to be like? Are the levels going to be right? I can't wait to see. But yeah, they're the probably the contender here that I have the most curiosity about.
So to go back to sort of the mental toughness part of this, right? I think when you have Brunson, Josh Hart, and Thibodeau at the top of this thing, I'm less worried about it. I feel like there's an infrastructure there, but infrastructure only does so much if you kind of leave the infrastructure. With Karl Anthony Towns has kind of done over his career, and I think he's certainly bought in to like systematic things on the court and things like that. I think he actually doesn't get enough credit for that kind of thing, but he is sort of aloof and his own kind of guy off the court. And I don't know if he just needs to like find an apartment in Williamsburg and just chill.
Hmm.
And I don't know that he could be like in the city of Manhattan. I'm not sure like Lower East Side is probably the best part for him, but he needs to find his space, find his friends, and kind of just do his thing. And then obviously just embrace the basketball side of this. But Tibbs is going to coach him hard. And not to say Chris Finch didn't, but like Tibbs just tends to be a little bit less forgiving on players who make mistakes. And Karl Anthony Towns makes mistakes in bad moments, and we'll see how that ends up. Like I think it's fair to wonder if he's even going to be in at end of games, like at the end of close games,
Right.
if he's having one of those nights, which he tends to have. And so, how does he handle that situation? Right? He was the number one pick and the guy in Minnesota before Anthony Edwards showed up, to now being, I don't know, like in the way that, not like pecking order on the court, but in the way that Knicks fans even think of him. It's like Brunson, everybody else who played at Villanova, like uh like Deuce McBride, and then maybe Karl Anthony Towns, like in terms of like
Yeah.
who they care about. And so that's going to be a thing that is definitely worth noting. And there has been definitely like a removal of some of that mental toughness, and definitely swapping that out for, no doubt, more high end talent and star power. But just sort of the chemistry experiment here is going to be interesting to watch. And then to go back to the point on depth, you start listing the depth chart out, and you're like, wow, this starting five is really, you got Brunson, you got Josh Hart, you got Mikal Bridges, OJ Anunoby, you got Karl Anthony Towns. It's like, oh, Mitchell Robinson's there, but he's hurt, and who knows when he's going to come back. Deuce McBride, everybody likes him. He had a good playoffs last year. From the reporting around New York, they felt better about losing Dante DiVincenzo because they had McBride. Okay, I can buy into that. All right, Precious Achua, that's I know him. He's played some minutes here and there. Campaign, Landry
Yeah.
Shamet. Like now, it gets
Yeah.
like kind of
You're
weird
gonna have
really
injuries.
quick,
You're
right?
gonna have injuries.
And you're gonna have
Um,
injuries,
Not to Bridges, who plays every single game,
right?
and same with Hart. But yeah, I mean, Towns is going to miss some games, and Anunoby is going to miss some games, and you already have Robinson out. So, yeah, the depth is a major concern here. I will say regarding the Cat mental toughness stuff, I will give him credit for definitely showing major signs of growth there,
Yep.
playing with Ant and just sort of just like I mentioned with Tatum earlier, like allowing himself to just play a sloppier more team first style of ball in the playoffs where it's like, well, I just need to be, a mud boy,
Hmm.
and help my team, get that beef going in the middle. And it's not going to be pretty. And I'm going to probably look bad guarding Jokic a lot, but I'm going to throw my body at him. So I do think it's possible that he's up to the task.
I think I have less questions on the court. It's sort of the handling the media. You go from like the darling of Minnesota, where they always were defending him every time they got, like, we can hate him, but you can't. Like we could say bad things about Karl Anthony Towns, but you can't. And that, to your point earlier, that's not really the vibe with Knicks fans or Knicks media, for what it's worth.
Yeah, probably the most media attention Cats ever had was all that craziness with Jimmy Butler,
Yep.
and that was just like a month or something. But New York, it's like 2 times that every day. So
Yeah. Last team here, the team that made the finals last year, the Dallas Mavericks. The reason why, they have Luca, they also have Kyrie. They add Klay Thompson. I really like some of the other additions they've made. You add Klay, Spencer Dinwiddie, Najee Marshall. You add the Grimes there. I'm less worried about sort of the Derrick Jones Jr. departure because they were able to add Najee Marshall, and I think Marshall's better than Derrick Jones Jr. I think there's enough there. I think there's certainly questions about their starting lineup, who do they close games with, all these things. But Jason Kidd has done a good job of figuring these things out over these last couple of years. And I think this front office has been nails over the last basically since the Kyrie trade. Um, I think they've basically nailed every single move that they've done. And from getting Derek Lively in the draft to Gafford and PJ Washington before the deadline, I just think they've built a really good roster. And when you're built around Luka Doncic, who's the second best player in the NBA, if you ask me, then you're top five, no matter who you ask. You're always going to be in this conversation. It was weird 2 years ago, the year where they traded for Kyrie in the middle of the year, but they were dealing with a lot of weird injuries and stuff, and Jalen Brunson wasn't there anymore, and all that kind of thing. But ever since they restocked, I think this is going to be a contending team for a while, as long as Luka's there.
yeah, last year when they whooped the Wolves in the
Hmm.
conference finals, probably in large part because the Wolves were depleted from the Nuggets series. But Luka just taking that major step forward, and it was like, oh, here it is.
Hmm.
right? And you could very well just see that happen one round later this year, right? That could happen in the finals this year. And it's just like, oh, he can do this. And it wouldn't be surprising at all, right? It's sort of like if you are playing a hard video game, and I know he's a gamer, and you can't beat the level, and then you just sleep on it, and then the next morning you play again, and it's like, oh, it's easy now.
Right.
That's what I kind of think he's like as a player, and he's obviously just a generational world class operator. Like he just sees the game incredibly well. He's got the size, he's got the hand speed, like he's got everything he needs.
It's kind of the closest thing to Jokic, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
all right, every time you're in the half court, like you're gonna get a good shot. It's gonna be a decent possession every single time, pretty much, unless he passes it to Kyrie and Kyrie does something weird.
And well, to go back to Brunson, I feel like he's just the smaller version of this.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's just that kind of player. At the same time, I think maybe a little luck last year,
Hmm.
in terms of the Wolves being depleted from the Nuggets series, in terms of the Thunder maybe being just a shade immature, right?
Yep.
With their
And
their youth.
and Dallas just caught fire from 3-point range in that series, also.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe PJ Washington doesn't, shoot as well.
If PJ Washington looks like he did in the finals, they don't make it past the Thunder, right? Like PJ
No,
Washington is a big swing piece for this team. I think he's one of the biggest X factors in the league this year because it's very hit or miss with that guy. And
yeah.
either the guy is lights out from the corner or it'll be a week until he hits another one from the corner. And he just sort of goes in these like it's never like a game. It's like these long stretches with this guy.
Yeah, I feel like Jay Crowder used to occupy this space. It was like
Yes.
just an important wing player on contenders, and it's like, well, if he shoots well, they're going to win the championship. We'll just have to wait and see. Um, but yeah, the other thing I would say about the Mavericks is that in terms of ceiling, raising potentials, Derek Lively, he was only a
Hmm.
rookie last year.
Hmm.
He could absolutely just not hit a wall like he did against the Celtics. And I mean, in the preseason, he's clearly wanting to show that he's got more in his bag than he showed us last year. So that could be really interesting.
That's my biggest thing when people's like, I don't know how they're going to defend, right? Like they were whatever it was, 13th in defensive rating after the All Star break last year, and they were better in the playoffs. At least it looked, from the eye test. But when everybody has concerns about defense, I always just go back to like, look, if Derek Lively takes a major leap defensively, and we already were seeing it in the playoffs and stuff, and that's why they got to the finals, part of it, then I have a lot fewer concerns because when you have a 7-footer like Lively who can just clean up stuff at the basket, and now, okay, now we're playing the 3-point variance game, and you really just need guys who are going to play hard. Like it's nice to have a Drew Holiday and a Derek White and a Jalen Suggs out there, but if you just have guys chasing over screens and funneling everything towards Derek Lively, like that can go a long way. And say what you will about Luca and Kyrie, but both of them, Kyrie more so than Luca, were showing pretty consistent effort, at least in terms of doing that, right? Just playing hard on defense. And so, yeah, I think Derek Lively is a huge piece for them and has a potential to evaporate a lot of some of the defensive concerns that people understandably have, but he would be the answer to those.
I think on offense too, his connection in the pick and roll with
Mhm.
Luca is something we could be talking about for a long time. He was already a very sophisticated roll man last year, and obviously he's playing with probably the best pick and roll passer.
Yeah,
And
Montana to Rice potential here. Yeah.
yeah, that could
Yeah.
absolutely take off in the new territory this year.
Hmm. It's a great call. In terms of reasons why they won't win the championship, there are look, the questions about their defense are fair. Clay Thompson, what else does he have at this stage in his career? I think it's all been good vibes out of training camp, preseason, media day, stuff like that. We'll see. I guess that's sort of one of those things. And I do still not totally trust Kyrie Irving, if that's okay. Like it was a good run, but he was pretty bad in the finals. And they can't really, the way that this thing is built, they can't afford for him to be bad. They need him to be all star level at minimum while Luca is doing the things that he's doing because everybody else is pretty entrenched in being a role player. Now, obviously, if Derek Lively, I think, could be like the second best player on this team one day. It feels early for that to happen in year two for him. So it's really still Kyrie's job. And if he wavers on that, the floor can kind of come out from underneath this team. So they really need a good Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, I think with the Celtics thing specifically with his relationship, that franchise and that fan base and that media base, like it clearly got to him. I don't think it was a physical thing so much, although he is a little bit small to play against that particular team and how good they are at defense. Um, I think that being in Dallas has been such a good thing for him because he's basically not in the Northeast, where the media lives, and he dislikes that a lot, and it definitely takes him off his game. Um, he's just unreliable health wise too. So he's just such a X factor in so many different ways, and like you said, um, the X factor went right last year. Um, I don't know how dependent they really are on him. I don't think they're that dependent on him for regular season success. Um, as a ceiling raiser in the playoffs, they are, but I don't actually know exactly how much. It would be really interesting to see them play a long stretch without him and see how that goes.
We might see it. So,
Yeah, yeah,
John Wilmes, thanks so much for jumping on, man. Appreciate it.
yeah. No problem.